Buying less and spending fewer hours online are hot topics I've seen come up time and time again over the years, particularly around New Year's when people are setting resolutions and goals for the year to come. And readers are no exception to this. But despite these good intentions, it's easy to slip back into old habits and fall away from the goal that you had. So, in today's video, I wanted to talk a little bit about buying less, spending less time online, and some healthy habits that we all can develop better, including myself, in order to achieve our goals. Hi everyone, my name is Kayla and welcome back to Kay's Hidden Shelf where we talk about books. Today, as you've seen, we're going to be talking about buying less, spending less time online, and achieving some of those goals that we've set for ourselves. Now, I will be talking about this in the specific category of reading and book buying, which are completely two different hobbies. But I will also want to mention that some of the tactics and ideas and concepts that we're going to be talking about in terms of setting up good and healthy habits to achieve our goals are something that you can apply to almost anything that you're trying to achieve. It's just through the lens of a reader trying to reduce their book buying and actually read the books that they own. Now, I know for myself in 2024, I had attempted the Read Your Shelf challenge, and while I did make some great changes and had some progress, I did not read every book on my shelf. That was not possible in a year's time, and I knew that would be the case, but I saw it as an opportunity to try and make some healthy changes around my spending, around my acquiring of things, if you will, and to live a little bit more intentionally and mindfully as I used to do before I started the channel, because that's a whole other change in my lifestyle that we'll talk about in another video. For those who don't know, the Read Your Shelf challenge is essentially a challenge you give yourself to not buy any more books until you've read the books on your shelf, which is incredibly daunting for some people who also have the habit or the hobby, if you will, of book buying. Now, of course, this video is for people who are trying to improve that, where they're trying to buy less, they're trying to keep less in their home. Either one of those or a facet of it, just for those trying to change their reading habits and their buying habits surrounding that. For those of us who read physically, there's a limit to our space. There's only so many books we can keep on our shelves and so many shelves that we can have. And so I wanted to address this because the Read Your Shelf challenge, while it is great, it's like anything you try and change in your life cold turkey. It's probably not going to work unless you have a will of iron, in which case you probably wouldn't be watching this video. But the concept of diving headfirst into changing a habit you've had for a long time, in this case, book buying, it's not going to happen overnight, and typically people will fall off the bandwagon for that within a month or so. As for myself doing this challenge in 2024, I did give myself some exceptions to the rules, if you will. Rather than not buying any new books, I knew I wouldn't be able to do that. And so rather than go full on out, I decided to meet it halfway, where I would intentionally try to read more of the books on my shelf or even from my Kindle to try and dial back that to be read or want to be read list, because it can be scary and daunting at how fast we add books to that list and then just never get to them, and the poor book is sitting on your shelf somewhere collecting dust forever unread and slightly judging. One of the exceptions I did give myself, which we'll talk about a little bit more in depth later, but essentially it was, if I already own book one in a series, I read it, I enjoy it, I want to continue said series, it's okay for me to go and get book two. I didn't see a problem with that, because if it's a series I'm enjoying and I'm liking, I think that's perfectly acceptable to do in my circumstance. And again, we'll be talking more about this later. But I knew for myself that if I wanted to make a big change, I had to take one step at a time in order to improve the habits that are preventing me from reaching this goal. And rather than dump all of the changes on 5 different habits that I might have had, I tried to tackle one at a time, and like the exception you saw, I tried to give myself some reasonable leeway rather than just saying, nope, cannot enjoy your hobby at all. Basically, I still wanted to enjoy the hobby that I love, reading, my pastime, my free time, and the enjoyment I get out of it. I didn't want to squash that or turn it into something completely despisable. All I wanted to do was reduce the amount of books on my shelf to keep the ones that I truly, truly love and I know I will love or want to read as high priority rather than an impulse buy that I found at the store just because in the moment it looked and sounded like a great thing. But when I got it home and a few weeks have passed, I really had no interest in it anymore. And I know for myself as well, the more things in my home just sitting around without a home, so those books on the floor, anything like that, is mental clutter for me as well. I start to feel stressed. I don't like the mess or things not in their place. And even having too cluttered of a space, too many bookshelves in one space, for example, can be overwhelming mentally for me. So, partly trying to improve bad habits, but also to reduce the mental clutter and stress that comes around with all of it. And as a result, the spending habits that go along with it, and more money that rather than spending on impulse buys, I can put towards more productive things. So, what are some key things you need to keep in mind? Well, first of all, keep in mind to be kind to yourself. It can take 30 plus days to set a new habit or a new routine. So, be kind, give yourself time, give yourself grace, and don't be so hard on yourself while at the same time maintaining your intentional goals and setting those new habits in place. Next is to remember that this video is going to be in the context of the Read Your Shelf Challenge, just because that has been going around quite a bit. It's quite popular. But again, these steps and mentalities that we're going to be talking about are the most important things to remember because it's about changing your mentality, it's about changing your intents and sticking with it, which is probably the hardest thing there is. And again, start small. Start with one thing, and as you feel more confident that that one change is sticking, add the next one. First, you need to go through your shelves. Before you even start the Read Your Shelf Challenge, which is focused on reading those unread books, go through your shelves, pick through any unread books that you are not going to read. You know you're not going to read it. You have a slight interest in it. It's been sitting there for years. You know you're not going to get to it. And you're not interested enough to actually keep it on your shelf. Get rid of it. I know there's that little voice in your head that might say sometimes, but I might love it, and that's okay. The goal here is to get rid of the books that you bought on an impulse that you really didn't want after you bought it, or it's sat there for years and you've just got no interest in reading it, or it is so low priority on your TBR that you know it's just you're not going to get there. Get rid of the unread books that you know you're not going to read, that are not even going to make it to this challenge, that you're probably going to unhaul down the road anyway. And if you go through your shelves and you say, yes, I intend to read every single unread book on my shelf, they all intrigue me, I want to keep them all, great. Good for you. Keep it. But if you come across a couple, a bunch, whatever the case, that are just not interesting to you anymore, that you know you're not going to read, chuck them, unhaul them. Obviously, don't throw them out. What I mean is to unhaul them. You can go about reselling them secondhand, gifting them, donating them, whatever the case, unhaul them in a way that is best for you. And then look at your shelves and make a plan. But what about mood readers? Mood readers don't always have a plan, and that's okay. I'm not saying look at your shelves, catalog every single book, and plan out your reading for the next 3 to 5 years. Not at all. What I'm talking about is set some realistic goals for yourselves based on what you have on your shelves. So I know for myself, for example, I have a few authors and series that I want to prioritize this year. You can leave your goal as simple as that. Say, yes, these are the ones that have been on the back burner. I've been meaning to get to them for a long time. I'm going to start with those and work your way from there. Mood reading, I do it too. And I gave myself that freedom, which is here's my intent, but I also need palette cleansers. I need something in between big and heavy, dense books, maybe something a little lighter, a shorter book. That's entirely okay. But give yourself an idea or a plan. And if you are the meticulous organizer, start a reader tracker or some kind of spreadsheet. There are a ton of tools out there. I am not the person for that, but there are a bunch of videos with reading trackers with that level of organization that can help you catalog those books, those unread books, and help you better organize and keep track of everything that you've got on your shelves, everything you have left to read, and which ones you should read next. Now that you have some intention on where you're going to start with your reading, the next thing we need to talk about is fewer trips to the bookstore. If you're the type of person who is going to the bookstore once, twice, 3 times a week, whatever the case, reduce it. Take whatever number you go to the bookstore for and reduce it. And if that's hard for you, just make sure when you're going in with no books, you're leaving with no books. Make that your goal. Again, this is about making this a realistic goal and a changing of habits that works for you. So for myself, I took fewer trips to the bookstore. Every time I felt the urge or the desire to go book shopping or just browsing, I sat down and I read. Instead of taking the time to go to the bookstore, I changed that habit so that I would sit down and read instead. And now I maybe go to the bookstore once a month, maybe once every couple months, depending. And it's because I spend that time reading instead, which it's just been a game changer. It's made a huge difference in not only my buying habits, but also made a dent in my shelves. The same thing works for online shopping, whether it's through Amazon or browsing online booksellers, independent booksellers, large booksellers, what have you. Whenever you feel the urge to pick up your phone and start searching, just put it down. If you are having that urge just simply out of habit and you have no actual intention of buying a book as part of your exceptions to the reading challenge, put it down and pick up your book instead. The whole concept is to train your brain so that whenever you think about going to the bookstore, whenever you think about browsing new books or potentially buying a new book, put your phone down. Recognize what you're doing, put your phone down, and go read instead. You're just training yourself out of the habit of book shopping and changing it to a mentality of actually reading. The other exception that I gave myself and I talked about earlier was being able to buy books within a series. If I own book one, I read book one, I enjoy it, I went out and bought book two. If I was loving the series or enjoying it, I would continue to buy it, but I was only buying one book at a time. So read book one, liked it, buy book two, read book two, liked it, buy book three. And for me, this prevented me from buying an entire series of books that I just was not going to read because I did not enjoy book one or book two, for example. So I was able to manage my spending and my space to series that I really truly loved. So if you do want to continue to buy books, but you want to be more intentional, then just set your limit rather than saying, I've read book one, I loved it, I'm going to buy the other 6. Maybe just buy one at a time. And it might not be exactly what you hope it would in terms of that moment and thinking you're going to love the entire series, and you very well might. But by buying one at a time, you're giving yourself a little bit of leeway and management rather than having now 6 new unread books on your shelves. You only have one, and one that you know you're excited to get to. Another way you can do this is by numbers and reward. So for example, if you read 5 unread books off of your shelf, you get to buy 1 book. Set yourself a goal, a number that works for you. If you read 10 unread books off of your shelf, you get to buy 1 book or 2 books. Just keep the number much smaller of the books that you buy in comparison to the books that you're reading. The idea here is that you want to reduce the amount of unread books off of your shelf, not say I read 10 books and now I can buy 11 books, because that kind of defeats the purpose. Another alternative is borrowing books from your local library. If you really do want to read a book and you know it's not an impulse, rather than buy it, you can borrow it from your local library. I know for myself, that's not really an option most of the time because of the size of our library. It's very small. And so some books are an 8-month wait or longer in order to read a book, or it's just not there. And when you request it, it just doesn't come in. Now, don't get me wrong, there are amazing libraries out there that don't have those issues. There are so many that are set up in a fantastic and accessible way that I don't see why people should not use their local library. I do understand some people don't like that idea or they prefer to own their own books, and that's completely okay. If that is you, then try the other options that we talked about. But if you really do want to read a book, but you are trying very hard to stay within your good habits of not buying a new book, or maybe you set a number goal and have not reached it, you haven't read 5 books yet to buy your one, go ahead. Use the library. I don't see any harm in that every now and again. If you're doing it constantly to the point where you're no longer reading any of the books on your own shelves, obviously there's something that needs to be rethought out there. But occasionally, absolutely, use your local library. It is there for you to use and enjoy. On the other hand, if you are in a similar situation to me where your library is just not very accessible, there's not really a lot of options for you, and you would like to read your book much sooner than a year out from now, then yeah, maybe focus your book buying to within the limits of those exceptions to the rules that we've made, but high priority reads and series that you are already reading rather than an impulsive new book that you've just seen on the shelves and you have done zero looking into. Don't get me wrong, sometimes you can find some amazing hidden gems there, but the idea of this is to rehone your habits so that you are a little bit more intentional about what you're reading and buying. All of these are stepping stones to building better habits in terms of your book buying and reading. And like I said, I know that book buying and reading are two different hobbies, and that's okay. But again, you want to manage it. If you're here and you're watching this video, you probably want to reduce the amount of books that you're buying. Let's say you finally read one of the books off of your shelf and you did not like it, or you dropped it halfway through because you were not enjoying it. Don't put it back on your shelf if that's the case. If you thoroughly did not enjoy it, please rehome it one way or another through reselling or donating, what have you. But putting books back on your shelf that you did not enjoy, that you DNF'd, and you do not plan to ever read again or try and come back to, just get rid of it. That's completely okay, because then you're making room on your shelves for books that you might enjoy better in the future, and you're keeping that clutter down. When it comes to reading, it is far easier to acquire books faster than you can read them, and I feel like a big influence on this is the online book community, whether it's YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, X, Blue Sky, Discord, and various other spaces on the internet, and the accessibility that we have today to be able to go and buy those books, whether it's in person or online, from across seas, what have you. These are all good things. Keep that in mind. The online book community, being able to find your bookish people and people of similar reading tastes, along with the accessibility and ease to be able to buy books, is incredible. It is a great thing. However, like anything, moderation is needed and it does have its downsides. There are also far more special editions and pretty books being printed nowadays compared to what I remember as a kid or a teenager. And again, that's not a bad thing. It's nice to see all these things, but it makes resisting buying beautiful and special editions signed by the authors that much harder. And I'm not talking just about the special editions that you can get at Indigo or Barnes & Noble, for example, like big box stores. I know in Canada, Indigo only started recently over the last few years incorporating sprayed edges and fancy indigo editions, if you will, but companies like Fairy Loot or The Broken Binding, these subscription style services that they offer, in addition to buying a limited print run of books, has become far more popular over the years. Again, that's not something I remember being a teen or a young adult. The reason I bring this up is because that FOMO steps in again, because those are limited run editions. There's a certain number of books being printed, and you might not see them again. that FOMO, that fear of missing out on it, is going to strike a lot harder than a book that you might see as a regular published edition on the shelves of your local bookstore. I also want to point out that I'm not immune to any of this, especially pretty books. I have the Broken Binding fantasy subscription and have had it since day one, since they opened. It's been amazing to see how their changes and improvements have gone over the years, and it's impressive to see how far they've come, how quickly they've done it, and again, that online influence. Every time I'm online, there's a new post from them about a new special edition that they're doing, which is great for them as a company. But for those of us who are feeling the FOMO, it can be really tricky to navigate not buying every special edition that they put out. Another influence is read-alongs and buddy reads. Those can give that FOMO feeling as well. It can get you really hyped up to read a book, buy it, or start an entire new series off of joining a read along. Again, that's not a bad thing. For me, and maybe there's some of you out there like me where you really want to take part in that read along, you plan to read the book anyway, let's say, for example, but you're not great with following deadlines like myself. Read-alongs can add stress for me in terms of joining read-alongs or buddy reads. I have a very hard time keeping up with the reading pace of others and then trying to talk about it as I'm reading about the book. While I do love being able to talk with people as I read the book and being able to share that experience, I'm not able to do it to the time commitment or involvement that many others will. And so I've learned over the years to say no to read alongs, to say no to buddy reads, unless it's a very individualized circumstance. I think I did one buddy read last year, for example, and to more focus on reading on my own pace and then being able to chat with people about the book after I've read it. For me, that works better. But that FOMO does kick in. There's a read along going right now for The Curse of the Mistwraith by Janie Wirtz, and I dearly, dearly wanted to jump on that because I plan on reading Janie's books this year. But I knew I was not going to be able to keep up in terms of pace, and I knew that it was going to stress me from just experience. So I am going to read it in my own time instead, and then hopefully come back to those videos and be able to comment or join the Discord groups that are doing it and comment later on. But knowing your limits and knowing your boundaries is a big part of this process as well. And being online a lot is going to make that much harder for you to resist buying new books and adding more books to your TBR. A lot of this comes down to figuring out where you're struggling. What are the habits that are preventing you from reaching your goal, and how can you one by one improve that? How can you change those habits for the better to help you in reaching your goal? Write a list. That's always a great place to start. Write a list of those habits. And on the flip side, write down the habits that you want to develop. This is going to take time. And I think that is the culprit of so many people falling off that bandwagon. Like I said at the beginning, go 30 days, try and keep these new baby step habits in place one at a time if you have to, but keep them in place, whether it's a change in routine, a change in your mentality. They're all difficult to implement over time. You're getting rid of something, you're changing something in your mindset and your routines that are well ingrained in your life. Don't expect it to happen overnight, and be kind to yourself. Being overcritical and harsh on yourself is just going to make you want to give up all the more. And really being kind to yourself, sticking with it, giving yourself a little grace is what's going to see you through the amount of time it takes to develop those habits you want in your life. While the Read Your Shelf challenge and goals like buying less and reading more are great things to set in place for yourself, trying to accomplish all of that at once is going to set you up for failure, likely. And there are some people where they're the exceptions to that rule, and that's fantastic. But for the majority of people, taking on such a huge change in habits and their preferences, their routines, what have you, is going to cause failure for many people. Sticking with it, making small changes, and focusing on a change of habit and mentality and intention are all going to help you more in the long run than just 1 year of Read Your Shelf challenge. And I think that's far more important, in my opinion. And I wanted to talk about this again because I tried this challenge, because I found ways that helped me through other practices that I've used in past for similar things, just a change in habit in order to accomplish a goal. And so I hope this helps someone out there to accomplish whatever their reading goal is. Again, the idea here is to figure out what the bad habit is, try and figure out how to change that habit into a good one to accomplish your goal. That's really the end of it. That's the short form of it all. And I would love to know if there are things that you've done to help you achieve your reading goal. Please leave them in the comments below for everyone else who's watching this who might benefit from it too. And I'm also curious just how you all navigate making better and healthier changes around your reading and buying habits as well. So if you've made it this far, remember, set your goals, figure out the habits you need to incorporate in order to achieve them, and work at it one step at a time. And most importantly, be kind to yourself. Thank you so much for watching, and take care of yourselves.